everybody. I'm going to share some slides with you, so bear with me as I do that. Okay, is everybody seeing that?
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, we're at the end already. Let me go to the beginning. All right. So welcome everybody, and I am delighted to be here tonight. This is my first Ask the Espers as a member of the Marlow Energy Group, and I've been delighted to get to know the team, and I'm very excited about the mission of Meg. So Marlow Energy Group started about a year ago and is starting to have an impact in town and has a number of objectives. And so it really has a mission to overall make Marlow a net zero carbon town with a variety of initiatives and projects. Starting with facilitating knowledge, exchange, effective networking and collaboration. All of this change really comes from individuals making behavioral changes and working together in their both business and personal lives to do things differently and to encourage others to join them. And so the more we can network and share knowledge and help people understand what activities they can do either at home or in their business or schools, Marlow will make its way to net zero carbon status much sooner. And that's what we're trying to help with. We also want to be facilitators in developing and raising investment in renewable energy projects in the town. These are not inexpensive, and therefore there needs to be a good level of support for people who want to make the steps towards installing and generating renewable energy. And so we're beginning to make some headway there, both just reaching out to schools and businesses that may want to take the step and just don't know where to begin and may need some hand-holding, some understanding of the legislative, regulatory, and funding environment so that they can actually make some of the aspirations they may have real, and others who may not yet even have envisioned what could be possible to help them see what is available and what the business case might be. And finally, to support local community share ownership and opportunities for local businesses to be creative and visionary about how our wonderful community could actually harness its resources better and move towards net zero carbon as quickly as possible, and bringing the whole community along with it in that process. So we are a volunteer organization. We need more volunteers. We'd like to energize and catalyze as many people in town to take part in whatever way they feel comfortable, bringing different skill sets, different levels of time commitment, and really all ages and all varieties of backgrounds. So if you have friends, colleagues that you think would be interested, please encourage them to join us. It's a £10 membership, and you can visit us at our wonderful website, which Robin has worked hard on and others have, which is down below, www.marlowenergygroup.com. So please spread the word, and we look forward to welcoming you at future events and keeping you posted on the activities we're engaged with. Recently, the most recent activity, I guess, that's something that we hope will go forward, is helping Borlase look at how they can install solar on their newer buildings. And they seem very ambitious in that, and it's exciting to be at the first steps really of helping them figure out the business model and funding solutions for that. So I think that's everything I had to say. I'll hand it back to Robin or John at this point. Many thanks.
Thanks very much, Susanna. That was really clear. Very grateful. So just to reintroduce our speakers this evening, the first speaker is David Adkins, who is the digital lead for National Grid. So David, without further ado, can I hand over to you?
Sure.
Oh, by the way, sorry, everyone should mute their screens while David's talking, if that's okay, so we don't get any background interference.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
can I just interject for a minute? Sorry to interrupt you. Anyone who wishes to ask questions, can they put them in the chat down the bottom of the screen? We'll take them at the end of the meeting.
Thanks,
Great,
John.
thanks.
Sorry, David, carry on.
No problem. Thanks both. I've chaired a few debates. I used to run a small, like a young energy professionals group, and always used to start with a provocative question to the debate. So thanks, Robin, for the lead in on the expensive connections. I will figure out how I can answer that and justify our expenditure. Interestingly, we've just had our final determinations today from Ofgem, which is our regulator. So we're looking through those at the moment and trying to understand whether we can deliver net zero basically over the next 5 years for the amount of money that we've been provided to do so. So let's go through some slides here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our position in the industry, a little bit about a couple of case studies, so about EVs, electric vehicles. Second, around our smaller connections. But I must apologise, our small connections, we're talking 30 megawatts plus, which is way beyond the size of sort of community projects typically. But we are trying to go down into that. SSE, your local distributor, would be the person to talk to, and I'm more than willing to support any conversations and sort of technical input to any projects that need to happen over the next period. And then obviously we'll have some questions at the end. So a bit about me, I am the digital lead. You introed me as that, Robin, but my background is I'm a power system engineer. I studied at Southampton, and that is through my whole career. That's been the basis of it, and I'm an engineer through and through, and take that through into my current role, which is basically creating tools for our engineers to be able to deliver better solutions for our customers. So a little bit about National Grid. So we are now more of a US-based company than we are a UK-based company. We bought into the US a few years ago, but we basically own and operate the England and Wales HV network. So they're 400,000 volts and 275,000 volt network. We have some of the 132,000 volt network as well. But your local distributor, so SSE in our area, is the person that has the local equipment below that. And as you can see on the left, this is our network. We also look after some of the network in Scotland, but there's 2 other companies that own that up there. And just interesting stats, so as much as our connection projects for our generators or demand sources, as Robin will talk about, can seem eye-wateringly expensive, the cost through to the consumer of running National Grid is about £25 on your bill. And that's based off a sort of average bill of about £500 a year on your electricity. And then our reliability is 99.99997%, I believe, from the last time I looked at the stats. And then our network, so I'm only pulling this up just to sort of illustrate a point. So we, as I said, our reliability is very high. We've got 346 substations. Each of these blobs is a sort of is a substation on our network. We're in this little zone here, and basically Marlow, Henley is in between all of our substations. We're in a sort of no man's land of National Grid electricity transmission connection points. And that's probably going to be interesting when I move on to the later parts of the presentation. But yeah, we're about 13 kilometers away from our nearest substation here. And that would be, approximately in the region of sort of 20 to 50 million to connect something in their local area. So we're not the people to connect to, but hopefully the sort of same principles apply here. So just a little bit about sort of how we fit in the industry. So I'm sorry if the colors on this are a bit off, but obviously you have all the different sort of major generators, major sources of power input into the system. Industry takes off demand at that level, so we connect major demand into our network as well. And just interestingly, actually, we we've had quite a few connection requests for data centers over the last year or so. And we are talking 150 megawatt data centers, the same demand as Reading in one data center. So we're in uncharted territory really around sort of connecting and the size of those sort of data centers that will drive the sort of 5G networks that we're planning. They'll drive the autonomous electric vehicles. They'll be able to keep us connected in everything we do, but the power consumption is now becoming a major component of that. So anyway, so that's netted off at that level. And then if you move further down, you go through the transmission network, which is the big equipment. And I should have actually brought some of our equipment in because it would show the size and sort of actually why just purely the metal costs a lot of money. But if you look down the motorway and you go past one of those overhead lines that has four strands per conductor, the spacer in between those is about 60 centimeters wide. So it's about this sort of gap between the overhead lines, and it looks like it's, you know, centimeters between them, doesn't it, when it's up above you? So this size of it is huge, and I've climbed one of those towers, and looking down is quite an interesting experience as well. But the electricity system operator in the middle, this is the system operator, which is typically on the news if there's any sort of issues with the power supply, etc. And they're based in Wokingham, so they're relatively local to us here. And then you have your local distribution network operators, which, as I say, is probably the people where we'll be starting to have connections for local energy projects. And they're the ones which have quite a lot of constraints on the network. They're really trying to figure out how they can get the most out of their assets, just like we are at National Grid as well, but to be able to facilitate the EV uptake as well as all of the other things. So it's a really interesting period at the moment to be able to figure this out. There's huge amount of sort of digital projects. That's why I'm interested in what I'm doing, to try and basically optimize the network so we don't have to build as much, but we can sort of sweat our assets as hard as possible to be able to get the most out of them. So just a really interesting thing. So when I joined National Grid, we processed about 30 new connections of people a year. We're now, this chart's a bit old, but we've now had 300 new connections this year. Most of them are smaller for us connections, so about 50 megawatts connections. This is all solar. This is all batteries being connected to the network. This is sort of mid-range projects that are coming in. And it's been a huge sort of uptick in this type of thing for us. But then if you go really big, and I'm just going to skim over some of these just for time, but we are looking at, well, the Committee on Climate Change that we need to double the sort of network capacity by 2050. But we are looking at how much wind needs to be on the network. So it's looking like, well, our targets are 30 gigawatts by 2030, 40 gigawatts by 2040, and then 75 gigawatts by 2050 to hit net zero. But the trouble is, majority of this is off the East Coast, or about 60% of it. And the sort of residents of Norfolk and various other people are finding it difficult, challenging to have the number of cables coming in from all of those offshore wind farms. So we're planning, we're working with them to try and do an offshore ring main to be able to get that renewable energy through to us. It's been quite interesting on the news recently, hasn't it? Sort of the realization that not all energy that we get from our supposedly renewable energy supplies is renewable, because obviously we all receive electrons, whatever electrons have come from either coal or renewable. We can talk about that if anyone's interested about that later. But yeah, we're going to have to build about 1,000 kilometers of new network to be able to connect up all this offshore wind. Electric vehicles. So don't worry about all this text. I'm sorry I dropped this in at last minute, but basically we're working with Department for Transport and various other government areas at the moment around sort of try and, there's 5 ways that you can connect to electric vehicles. If people get electric vehicles, which hopefully they will by 2035 now, you'll charge them at home. I have on-street parking here. I couldn't charge mine at home, so I would have to rely on my work to be a destination charging, supermarket, whatever, but also motorway service stations. And we are looking at what the motorway service network needs to be in order to support those longer range journeys, which are the things which people really sort of have that range anxiety about. And we've done a project which means that no one will be over 50 miles away from a rapid charger. And these are serious power chargers, which we are looking at supporting and facilitating connections for, working with various charge point providers to be able to install. And we're already looking at the first sort of couple of trial positions for these, but these will be, you know, sort of turn up with your car and you'll be charging in minutes, rather than it'll be the same experience as just getting a coffee basically, or the same as filling up with petrol. So this is the future for EVs, and there'll obviously be a lot more charge points in local areas as well. And then we're also working with the rest of the transport industry as well. So electrification of rail is already sort of underway, but there's lots of other things like bus, maritime, even aviation as being things which need rapid charging to be able to get, so they need some big charging points to be able to do this. Just the other thing which I thought would be of interest for here is that, yeah, I talked about smaller projects. I know they're not as small as we potentially need to go for this type of group, but typically you connect into a DNO or a or national grid with a bay. So basically we have these substations, they have like modular units. You basically get a couple of switches and it comes out, and then you run your cable to your site. Our bays cost about £1 million each to be able to connect into. You then have all the equipment inside it, which even the transformer to step up to our voltages can be 4 to 5 to 6 million, depending on what type of projects you have. So we, over the last couple of years, we've been working on these connections called tertiary connections. So all of our transformers across our network, and a transformer steps electricity up from one voltage to another, have a third winding on them. And we've done a sort of innovation project to be able to connect in smaller generators to those points. And basically we can now connect sort of 50 megawatt, 57 megawatt projects in for about 3 million into those. 3 million is a hell of a lot of money. I completely understand that for the type of project we're talking about here, but for these projects, this actually really opens up a new sort of area of being able to get onto the grid. And that's why we've been flooded with 300 connection requests over the last couple of years. So it's really interesting and sort of opening up for us. And now we're just trying to try and get more and more transformers available for this. Just quickly on our digital, actually I won't be able to flick over because the screen won't allow me, but basically my projects is around how we can sort of automate the whole process. So we're running now, we're building lots of algorithms to be able to route cables, to be able to place assets, to be able to basically give you as customers the cheapest connection points for your type of generation. And this sort of QR code that's in the bottom right hand of the screen, I'll share a link in the chat as well later, but we have our first project, which is a portal where you can sort of select what type of energy requirements you have, and it will tell you sort of the best places to connect, or if you have a connection area, it will tell you the sort of costs and sort of how much you'll be charged for various things. So that's me. I think are we going over to Steve before questions, are we, John?
Yeah, we're going over to Steve next. We have questions at the end. It just strikes me, Dave, that you're sort of a bit megalithic, aren't you? I mean, you're a bit like Stonehenge. You're massive and immutable, and what we want is lots of small little things that can service villages and towns. You don't seem to cater for that. So what I'd like to do is hand over to Steve, because I think he's got some solutions for that.
Yep.
Steve.
Thank you, Robin. Hope everyone can hear me clearly. Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, great. Okay.
I'm going to introduce you, Steve. Sorry, because of the recording, I forgot we're recording. I just want to introduce Steve Shaw, who is the director of Power for People, which is a national organisation that has been the driving force behind the local electricity bill that is currently working its way through Parliament as a 10-minute rule bill. So far, well, the bill was proposed by Peter Aldous, MP, who's a Conservative. So far, it has attracted 239 MP signatures, of which 109 are Conservative. So if there was a vote on it, it would become law tomorrow. So we all wonder why the government hasn't adopted it. Sorry, Steve, back to you.
Thank you, Robin. I'm close. I might slightly amend what you just said in my little presentation, but appreciate the introduction. And thank you for your kind words earlier as well but what I would emphasize is our efforts. It's really been a really big grassroots effort from people all over the country getting in touch with their MPs en masse that has led to us being where we are today with this campaign. And I obviously pay tribute to them and indeed to yourselves, because I know you've all been helping. So thank you for your efforts. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, so hopefully this will work. And here we go. So again, if everyone could just give me a thumbs up, assuming that's all looking okay.
Yeah, perfect.
The presentation, excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the campaign for the local electricity bill, which we call the Community Energy Revolution, because local electricity bill is a bit dry, although that is very much what the bill is, and that was the parliamentary clerks who gave it that title. I would have preferred it to be called the Community Energy Bill, but there we are. So I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to give you an overview. I appreciate that most of you are pretty familiar with community energy, but nevertheless, I'm going to talk a bit about it as well. And if you know what I'm talking about, you can enjoy that this is what I talk about to lots of other people who don't know very much about community energy, and also what I talk about to people like members of parliament, many of whom don't obviously know that much about community energy either. I want to tell you about the progress of the campaign so far as well. I want to tell you a bit about the bill and how it would work. And then, yeah, hopefully we can have some questions and a discussion. I'd also like to say before I start, thank you, David, for your words. And I do think it's very good to have heard from David, because whilst, of course, the National Grid are the very large sort of trunk wires of the infrastructure that we have, rather than the more local wires, which are controlled by regional monopolies. You know, they are part of the whole system. So, you know, and obviously we are going to need really the agreement of National Grid if we are to see this piece of legislation work. So it's great to have David here talking with us as well. So thanks, David. So let's proceed. So yes, this is me. Yes, I founded Power for People 3 years ago. And I'll just say a brief word about Power for People. We are a climate campaigning organization. My background, Robin, you said at the start you didn't know my background, so just my background briefly. I am a parliamentary campaigner. I've worked on a number of campaigns to see new laws passed by Parliament, always cross-party campaigns, and always with the same method, which is what I hinted at earlier, the grassroots mobilization. Lots of people writing to their MP and urging their MP to back a specific change in the law that then would create an environmental solution. And I'm going to talk about a couple of little examples later. So Power for People has two aims. We are focusing on energy. We appreciate that that's not the only way to help stop climate change, but energy we see as the biggest piece of the puzzle, specifically, particularly with regards to the UK, in which case we want to see a significant acceleration in the deployment of renewable energy generation in the UK, because whilst it's been pretty good, the rate of decarbonisation that we've had, certainly since the Climate Change Act was passed in 2008, we are not on track. We are way off track to meet our climate targets and to hit net zero by 2050. So we must see a rapid acceleration. The second thing we want, the second aim we have as an organization, and this is just as important, is communities must benefit. Local communities must benefit from the transition to renewables, because if they don't, the risk is that there will be a backlash, and that could stop the whole thing, which would be terrible. Communities absolutely must benefit. And we know by looking at countries like Denmark, where communities do get direct benefits from new renewable schemes, people love it. Communities in Denmark, literally, when new schemes are proposed, lobby for the new turbines or whatever to be built near them. So we want to see benefits going to communities. This can happen. There's absolutely no reason this can't happen. So let's talk about the heroes, the community energy groups. There are about 500 of them. This is West Mill Cooperative, which I think is in Wiltshire. A substantial solar array there in a field and some turbines as well. Very well organized. This is a lot of their members there. Impressive. There are about 500 of these groups across the country. Here we have one in Aberdeen, a small Archimedes screw in the river. This was the first urban, I know you can't really see any houses there, but it's actually quite in the center of residential area of Aberdeen. First hydro community residential hydro project in an urban area. So that's their group there. And here's another example. This is actually where I live, not literally the building I live in, but it's in Hackney where I live in East London. This is Bannister House, which is council housing and an array solar on the roof there. And there are about 500 of these kind of groups across the country, and they broadly do, I mean, it's very impressive what they've done. They've obviously had to get funding together. They've then got this infrastructure built, and they're generating off it, obviously, and that electricity is going into the grid. But they will have supply contracts with large utilities. Obviously, they don't sell to end customers, and that's really the problem that I want to talk about. You know, we can't buy our electricity straight from these groups, and indeed, the problem is illustrated very clearly with numbers. So here's some numbers. So 3,000 megawatts. So that is the generating capacity that a government report in 2014 said we could have had by now of community renewable energy. But what do we actually have now? We have around 280 megawatts, which represents less than 0.5% of the UK's electricity generating capacity. So we are less than 1/10 of where we should be, according to a government report 6 years ago. So clearly, whatever mechanisms or policy or rules are in place, and it really is the rules that govern the market that's the problem, it is not happening like it should happen and could happen. So this is what we are trying to fix. We want to see that 3,000 megawatts of community renewable generation built, and obviously benefiting local communities. Interestingly as well, our estimates, and indeed that 2014 government report, was clear that 3,000 megawatts is not the ceiling limit. That was what would happen over about 6 years, but there was huge scope for a lot more than that to be built, and indeed to benefit communities. And we estimate it could be at least double. So that would be coming up to about 10% of our current generating capacity, so a really significant proportion. The problem, actually, just before I talk about the solution, so just ignore this, to talk a bit more about the problem, it is the regulations, it is the rules that govern the market. We have an energy system and an energy market that largely exists and because of rules that were created in the early 1990s. And that was because back then, the energy system, as some of you may remember, was privatized. And it made sense back then to have the rules that we currently have, because all we had back then was very large power stations sending the electricity out across the grid. But of course, things have dramatically changed now. As we know, we now have distributed generation, we have all this potential for smaller scale generation, but the rules are not fit for purpose. Now, interestingly, the energy minister himself, Kwesi Kwarteng, MP, fully accepted that point at an adjournment debate that was held in the House of Commons. It was held by the co-sponsor of the bill, of the local electricity bill, Ben Lake MP. He made that point, and as did a number of other MPs at the debate. And the energy minister, in his response at the end of the debate, accepted that point fully. And so that was progress. And I mean, we actually felt that the minister's comments were constructive and that he genuinely does have an interest to be helpful and cooperative. And he actually said he wanted to work in a cooperative spirit. So, the winds are looking like they're pointing in the right direction. But we are not there yet. So let's talk a bit more about the solution. Well, I've got a picture of Parliament here because ultimately we need to change the rules. we need regulatory change, and that means legislation. So that's why we are going to Parliament. We have drafted a bill. Here it is, the local electricity bill. Quite short, isn't it? About a page. That's the sort of size that bills are at this stage with campaigns like this. Now, in no way are we saying that this exact page of draft legislative text is what should exactly become law, and no MP would actually say that either. But it contains the principle, and the principle is all about proportionate costs. What we want to achieve is the ability for you and me to buy our electricity, if we want, directly from a local supplier. That supplier could be community owned and community run, but that's what we want. And what's standing in the way is the costs of the community generating groups selling it directly to us. Currently, the costs of being a licensed supplier are extremely high. They're well over £1 million. And so it is impossible, if you are a smaller scale generator of clean energy, to actually sell directly to local households, local businesses, etc. That is why you and I and everyone must go to a nationally operating energy utility to buy our electricity. Now, this can be changed, and the bill would allow it to be changed. It establishes what's called a right to local supply, and it gives Ofgem specifically, Ofgem is the energy market regulator, it gives Ofgem the duty to make the costs of selling electricity directly to local customers proportionate. An analogy to help you understand this, if it isn't clear already, I appreciate it can be quite jargony. So, and I find this very helpful, works well with lots of MPs actually. So it's like me saying, I want to set up a microbrewery, and I want to brew local ale. Which lots of people obviously think sounds like a great idea. And I make a business plan, and I obviously will have to borrow some money to get it all set up. And I'm going to have a delivery van. My delivery van will be taking my lovely locally brewed beer to local restaurants and pubs and cafes. But then when I go to register my van, I get told that I have to pay £1 million a year towards the road network. So it's then impossible. It is impossible for that business to work on a local scale. The only scale it can work at is if I have a nationally operating supplier of beer and have lots of vans. And that is the situation we've got. So what's needed is for the costs to be proportionate. Now we have it if you can run a microbrewery, because one van, obviously you're paying just for that van to be road taxed and the fuel duty. So we have a proportionate system in that sense and in that way, but we don't have it with electricity supply, and we can. Now the detail of making that work is not laid out here in the bill. The detail would be up to Ofgem to implement. Now we accept that maybe there could be more detail fixed in the bill on exactly the rules that Ofgem will put in. And there's discussion to be had on that. And indeed, this bill will change. This bill will become longer and more complicated, but it must contain the principle. To tell another story about this kind of thing, I worked on the campaign for the Climate Change Act, which was first written in 2005, the day after Boxing Day, by my two colleagues. I didn't really write it, I was quite young, but my two colleagues, Martin Williams and Ron Bailey, we were in one of the pubs in London Bridge, and they wrote the first 3 clauses on the back of a napkin. And then we drafted it a few days later, and it was 5 pages. We then ran the national campaign for it. Martin led it, as he was head of the parliamentary unit at Friends of the Earth. And when it became law, it was 125 pages. But the principle was the same. The principle never changed. And indeed, we do not want the principle in this to change. You see there as well, all those MPs. It's actually a lot more now, because this is from, I think, about 12 months ago. But you see the sort of the italic names at the top, so that you can have 12 co-sponsors of a bill. So Peter is listed right at the top there, but we also have 11 other co-sponsors. They are cross-party from all the major parties, and the smaller ones as well. So yeah, as of today, it's 232 MPs support this bill. So that's well over a third of the House of Commons, 109 Conservatives, as Robin has already mentioned. So really great and encouraging support, but not enough. We still need more. In my experience, well over half the House of Commons is what is required before the government officially backs a bill like this. So there we are. Here's the support. Here's how the campaign's going. As I said, there's the 233 MPs. There's the party breakdown there. Even some Northern Ireland MPs supporting it, despite that it doesn't actually apply to Northern Ireland because they have a different energy regulator. But those two DUP and the one SDLP have both said, have all said they think it's a great model that they would want to see applied to Northern Ireland. So they're happy to back it. So that's nice. County and local authorities backing it. That's over a third. Those 65 national organisations. Two of them are two of the 6 regional grid monopolies. So 2 of the 6 distribution network operators are backing the bill. That's Electricity Northwest and Western Power Distribution. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic to have those organisations on board. And indeed, we obviously want the other 4 to back it. And indeed, David, and I'm sure you can give an executive answer right this minute. We'd really like National Grid to look closely at the bill, and obviously we really hope that we can have a dialogue with you, and we would like ultimately National Grid to be supportive of the bill. So we look forward to you saying yes at the end of this meeting. Oh, he's nodding. Fantastic. We'll take that as a yes, shall we? Lots of parish and town community councils as well. It's fantastic. And lots of community energy groups and community organizations as well. So, the thing to emphasize, a very strong, broad level of public support at civic level, right from the grassroots all the way up. So to talk a bit more about these kinds of campaigns, and I want to emphasize strongly, they work. This was the first campaign I worked on. At the front there is Joan Ruddock MP, who, as a backbencher, took we called it the Doorstep Recycling Bill. It's actually called the Household Waste Recycling Bill. Next to her there is Tony Juniper. He was Chief Executive of Friends of the Earth at the time. They led on the campaign, but it was a grassroots campaign. The reason we all put out our weekly collection of recycling is because of this act that we got through Parliament. Before this act, the government was saying, no, we don't need doorstep collection. But we really did. And of course, recycling rates have massively increased for domestic waste since it came about. So, I mean, the recycling collection is a real foundation now, I think, of most people's sort of connection to the environment in the UK. So, we really can achieve things. Another one, I did mention the Climate Change Act. I don't think it's quite understood just how effective the Climate Change Act has been. I mean, it has a requirement on government to progressively reduce emissions across the economy to hit a 2050 target, which was 80% reduction based on 1990 levels, but is now 100%. Since the amendment made by Theresa May's government. I mean, it has led to the policies that have seen the biggest offshore wind farms in the world constructed that were in David's presentation there, east of the coast. It has led to almost every coal power station in the UK closing. This is an incredibly effective piece of legislation, and it came about due to grassroots effort and a public campaign. Absolutely fantastic. Cross-party campaign, civic support, lots of people lobbying their MPs. So never doubt that this thing works. In fact, I would go so far as to say this is the most effective form of campaigning that exists, really, by a long margin. So what I ask you to do, please, if you haven't already, is to sign up, and please ask your MP. And I think for most of you, it's Joy, isn't it? Ask Joy to please support it. If you're from a constituency, or anyone from a constituency where they do support it, there is lots that supportive MPs can do. We need supportive MPs to take more action, to keep promoting it. So the first thing to ask them to do is to write to the Energy Minister and ask that the government support the bill too. And I just want to say one other thing with regards to Joy and Thomas. I say this at you somewhat, but also to everybody. Joy can definitely support this bill. She is a parliamentary private secretary, which is a sort of formal position towards being a member of the government. But I mean, Faye Jones, who is the Conservative MP for Brecon and Aragtonshire, she is a parliamentary private secretary, and she has formally stated her support for the bill. Last week, I had a virtual meeting like this with the constituents of John Glenn, who is a minister, an economic secretary to the Treasury, and he stated on that call that he supports the bill publicly. He's happy to publicly put his name to it. Jeremy Hunt, when he was in the cabinet last year, he said he supports the bill. He said it publicly. So I really hope that Joy feels that she could say that she supports the bill. We do need her support. We do need more MPs on board this. It's clearly something constituents feel strongly for. So Thomas, please convey this to Joy. She's not sticking her neck out at all. Quite the opposite. So there ends my presentation. And I really hope we could have questions and discussion.
Steve, that was very illuminating. It wasn't really a talk about the local electricity bill. It was a talk about how to influence parliamentary legislation. It was absolutely fascinating. Just on the Joy Morrissey front, she has been reluctant to sign, and she's cited her position as a PPS as the reason. But she has been very supportive. She has written to the Minister Kwasi Kwarteng. I actually sent she's arranged for me to meet Kwasi Kwarteng in January. I've actually sent an invite to his office to attend this meeting today. I don't know if anyone from his office is actually listening in or not, but she has done everything that she can apart from actually come out and state that she supports the bill. But I suspect now that you've reached 232 MPs, I think a lot of MPs who have been reluctant before will decide that this is something that's worth getting behind, because clearly it is. Steve Baker, we've also lobbied Steve Baker at High Wycombe about your bill. He didn't seem to know very much about it when we talked to him, but I'm sure he's on a rapid learning curve. We also lobbied him about the Green Home Grants Initiative, and it was his intervention with bees that actually got the Green Home Grants Initiative extended by a year to March 31st, 2022. So Steve Baker may not be everyone's favourite MP, but he's very effective if he decides that he agrees with you. I think people are a bit scared of him at bees.
Can I just point something out as well, Robin? We've also written to the Leader of the House to ask that the local electricity bill gets bumped up the running order the next time it appears, because when these bills come up on a sitting Friday, if they're below sort of third or fourth, it's very rare that they actually get reached for debate. So we've written to ask for that to happen as well.
Well, I mean, that I've been telling everyone that Joy has done a great job supporting the initiatives that we brought to her attention. So, you know, I hope the Speaker or the Leader responds positively to your intervention, because that's what's needed. We need to get this bill up the agenda when it comes up for debate. So,
Thomas, may I just say, we really appreciate the efforts that Joy has made. So, you know, please convey my thanks. But I didn't know that she had written to the Speaker, and that's great. So, you know, and we'd be very happy to thank her publicly as well.
I will convey that back, and I promise you I will also convey back your request for public support.
If only she was here, we'd have had it already, Thomas. You weren't briefed, were you? Okay, so let's open this up to the sort of general debate. So there are a lot of questions on the chat function here, because it's obviously stimulated a lot of interest. But before we do that, I think in fairness we ought to ask David to respond. I mean, when Joy Morrissey approached the minister and talked to them about it, she did say that the major obstacle was the national grid, and that most of the pushback was coming from the national grid. And I don't really understand why that would be the case, because they're operating at a different level. So David, do you have can you give us any insights into why the national grid would not support this initiative and the local electricity bill?
I don't have any direct insight why we wouldn't. I mean, I suppose personally, I think it's a fantastic idea and campaign. So I'd be really interested, Steve. I suppose so I'm more than willing to, as you say, around sort of, we've got a couple of people that are leading different campaigns at the moment. I'd love to set things up for you to be able to engage with them, get the right people sort of interested in it, etc. So that's fine. I suppose to me, I wouldn't understand why I would get in the way because we are setting up community project funds. We've got a variety of different things which we're trying to do. I don't just want it to be sort of face value stuff. This would be the real thing which would enable the future.
Joy didn't give a name. I mean, she didn't say who was obstructed, but she just said that National Grid. I mean, I suppose they have a business model which is, mega sort of what things, and they see lots and lots of community projects as some sort of threat to their business model. Is that feasible, or is that just ridiculous?
Well, I suppose so. The pipeline of projects that we have and the amount of assets that we're going to have to build to facilitate them. So I suppose I would echo your words, but in a different way, Robin, would be as in it's noise, but in a different direction, as in why would we engage against it type thing. We should allow that, because there's two ends of the spectrum here. There's multiple ends to this problem, isn't there? There are lots of different solutions which will act
absolutely
and get us to net zero. Doing the major projects to connect those into the grid to be able to reduce the overall carbon intensity of the network, as well as enabling. I don't understand why they don't conflict to me. I don't think there's any. But let's get the people that can make the decision, Steve, to talk to you.
That's really good to hear.
Thank you, David.
There's all sorts of questions about renewables and the national grid. So, I mean, if you read the newspapers that are, environmentally illiterate, like the Telegraph and the Mail, they're always saying, oh, we're going to have blackouts and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, what is the danger of that as the percentage of the power supply comes from renewables?
So we've actually got we're actually quite low demand at the moment, but I think the event which someone was it Edmund, sorry, in the chat, was saying, so on Tuesday and Thursday actually we had capacity warnings issued on the network. Both of them, there were no blackouts, so the capacity didn't come close to being a negative capacity. And there's lots of things that we would do before sort of forcing people to be disconnected from the network, so we can lower the frequency. We can do various things in order to do that, but the amount of generation we have compared to the demand at the moment is probably a relative high but that includes renewable generation as a major proportion of it. So I think we're in a period where there's pretty our sort of reliability and our network resilience is very high. The capacity market and the ability to get all of that generation on the system and willing to bid in any period. So this is a market that we're facilitating in effect, isn't it? We are the wires in between a generator and demand sources. The ability to get all the generators on at any given time is market driven, and that's the issues that you're seeing. It's not necessarily that there is too little generation available overall. It's just that it's not all present on the system. So there's multiple ways to get through that, and there's lots of local small generation as well as big generation. Which
as the percentage of renewable increases, then you run into more danger. So one of the ways of storing energy is pump storage. I mean, the Norwick plant in North Wales was the first to be built in this country. So why haven't you built more of those?
So we wouldn't build any of these ourselves anyway, because it would be its own private project which would build that. So De Norwig is a 300 megawatt generator, and if you think even this week peak demand was 45.2 gigawatts, so 45,000 megawatts. So the sort of the number of those projects which you'd need in order to sort of support the network would be massive. And De Norwig in itself is a huge engineering. Go there actually; it's a really interesting day trip. And absolutely
I mean, that's what the question was. Why haven't you built more? Because you need lots. Why haven't you built more?
Well,
why haven't all been built? Sorry.
So I think this is also part of the sort of energy so more and more people are building batteries, but they're not being incentivized through the markets at the moment in order to get them built. So we're starting to see smaller batteries being put onto the system. And as I say, for us, smaller is sort of 50 megawatt batteries co-located with solar projects at the moment. But the economics is only just starting to stack up. Their ability to enter into just selling electricity wholesale doesn't allow them to make enough money to be able to pay back those assets, basically. So if they arbitrage, as in if they take in demand and then they sell that energy back as a generator, in effect, back into the market, they don't get enough money. They need to have other services. So there's lots of balancing services which National Grid, the other part of National Grid, the ESO, have. And they're trying to get more markets to allow them to make more money across all those services to be able to be there. It's a bit of a market failure, I think, at the moment, that there's that or become a market failure.
Well, has National Grid done a survey of what the most efficient way of storing energy is? I mean, you can store it by splitting water into hydrogen or nitrogen into ammonia. There's hundreds of ways of storing energy. Has National Grid done an analysis of what is the most efficient and which has the lowest carbon footprint? Because batteries do not have a low carbon footprint.
No, so this is slightly outside of my knowledge base, but there's a tiering of different storage technologies for different sizes. Batteries are the ones that you do need for the higher frequency response projects, and those are the ones which people are building at the moment. So they are the ones that can react in the fastest way. That's why people are building them. They can enter into the other markets to be able to gain extra revenue streams. The larger projects, slower responding. So flow batteries are the next size up, and then you would have liquid air storage and various other types of battery, and then as you say, sort of the pumped water would be, or sort of movement of anything in order to store potential energy is probably the largest size, but the slowest to respond. So all of those technologies there, I think it's for the market then to come and produce those onto the system, and all of the networks are here to connect those projects.
Okay, so we've had some questions about electrical charging. So you are looking at 6,000 fast chargers by 2025, I think you said.
So that's for, we're trying to push and sort of agitate the market to deliver that, in effect, and work with government in order to sort of understand how that fast charging network works and is built up. So as we were saying, we're potentially looking at connecting 50 of those across our major network, and then the rest of them will be connected into local distributors. Still large projects, but smaller than our connections.
But I mean, there's no control over what sort of chargers these are, because I mean, Tesla have their own system. Some are going to be doing charging from the ground. You just drive over a charger in the floor of the car park. Others are going to be plug-in. I mean, do you have any discussions with government or the suppliers as to whether we can have a sort of sensible system rather than a market free for all, which seems to be what's going to happen?
So I'm sure our EV team are, but I suppose that in itself is its own market, isn't it? So hopefully, just like charging of your mobile phone, in effect, it will come down to a couple of different types, or one universal type of charger to be able to connect your car. And hopefully, sort of people like Tesla, who have got a sort of locked down service, will be able to open that up to other people as well. And I think the other thing that needs to take place in that market is just to sort of make the paying for charging not need any other infrastructure. So just tap and go with your credit card type thing rather than anything else.
Well, that's what Tesla does. You just literally drive in and tap, and that's it. That's what they do.
With Tesla, is that?
Yeah. He's got an app.
It's your card, isn't it? With the Tesla.
The app takes it paid out of your bank account, so it's done and dusted. The problem is that Tesla hasn't got enough charging points to go to Wales, which is a big drawback in my book. So, Steve, would you like to come back at this stage and just sort of make any comments on what you've heard?
I would, Robin, but I mean, there's quite a few questions as well in the chat. Perhaps we could go through those. What?
Yeah.
Or I mean, you also you said you made a comment. Well, perhaps let's go through the questions that people have asked. I feel that's the right thing to do.
Okay. Well, I haven't had time to read them because can you tell me pick one for me?
Well,
Steve?
So Ian Coggan was the first to direct one at me. Generally, which was with regards to DNOs, particularly SSEN, not seeming to care, etc. So from our perspective, there's 6 DNOs, and 2 of them have publicly stated their support for the bill, and they have even been writing to MPs in their regions asking them to back it too. So that's pretty strong. That's impressive. That's about as much as they can do, really. And we appreciate that. We are trying to get the others to back it. In terms of trying to get them to do more, well, I'm only going to comment specifically on our campaign, but if we can succeed in getting a local electricity act and actually having local suppliers, that will actually help them do the right thing, because Ofgem will then be implementing new rules that they will have to conform to in order to have an increase in distributed renewable generation and community energy. So that's partly why we've done what we've done. That's all I'll say on that.
Thanks for that.
David?
Sorry, do you want to come back there, David? No, okay. So Edmund Gemmell, is Edmund there? Because I think he ought to ask this question himself. Are you there, Ed?
Yes, I'm here. Which question do you want me to ask?
Well, the one that you put on the chat function.
The first one?
Yeah, I know we're talking about local project mainly here, latest report from scientists, etc.
Yeah,
they get to, can they speed up, basically, is what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a general question for David and what his feeling is on National Grid. But latest report, and I did put it in the chat, that came out from Breakthrough in Australia just recently, and has been endorsed by quite a lot of top scientists, including David King, as being the right target. Says that the only way of keeping ourselves safe is a 2030 net zero target, and everything else is the equivalence of suicide, because we're going to go into totally uncharted territory, and the tipping points are all going to be activated because it'll take us well above 2 degrees, and the tipping points will activate between 1.5 and 2. Let's assume that sense could be seen and a focus would go to 2030. In those circumstances, David, could National Grid, assuming money wasn't an issue, step up to the plate and get the infrastructure there for a 2030 net zero target?
Yeah, so I think so that's the short answer is yes, I suppose. I suppose the longer answer is the things that would need to be in place to enact that. So in order to build any of our infrastructure, the major thing is planning. And it takes, so to build a new overhead line or to build a major cable route, it's 3 years to build it, but it's about 7 to 8 to 9 years to get planning for that route. So we're in a sort of...
Sorry, what did you say? 7 to 9 years to get planning?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of trouble with planning authorities in Marlow. I think I can understand exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Fossil fuel addicted dinosaur are the best description of the council in Marlow.
So that is one of the major things which would hold that process up. I suppose then just availability of capital for people to actually build the projects that would need to do it. So would be the second part, wouldn't it? So, but obviously, if we were to get a target for 2030, there would need to have to be a green investment fund that would need to support that in order to support the projects to build, because they have a similar sort of build time for the major projects as well. So it's about 10 years to get any major project off the ground, fully planned, etc. So I think that would be the thing. And but I think, yeah, absolutely. I suppose our behavior would have to massively change as well, wouldn't it? If that is the thing which is where we're targeting. It wouldn't just have to be a supply side bit, it would have to be a demand actions as well in order to curtail that amount of sort of power and get us to proper net zero by 2030.
So David, one of the infrastructure kits you might need is a high voltage DC transmission line between the UK and Europe, so that on windless days in the UK you've got sort of southern solar power from Spain, allowing people to cook their porridge in Scotland.
Yeah.
And, you know, on sort of cloudy days in Spain, you've got wind from Scotland letting them cook their paella. So,
yeah.
I mean, what are the prospects of that? Is there a plan to have a high voltage DC line?
So we have 4 interconnectors currently built, I think, with Europe. So to France, to Belgium, to Denmark, I think, and sorry, my knowledge is failing me, but I can send the links around later. And we're planning various others as well, even to Iceland, I think is the latest sort of potential. So we've sort of, which is going to be the world's longest cable. So yeah, it's there. The technology's there. Again, it's the market which is holding that back in order to, and it's getting saturated. We think the sort of interconnector market for us as a country. So we'd have to go further to enact that, but it's a good answer.
What do you mean by it's saturated? I don't understand what you mean by that.
The amount of the sort of profit that an interconnector can make in itself, because they in effect run as their own company. We own a few of them, a couple of them. The market is not the arbitrage, the difference between the markets isn't there between a lot of the different areas. So it's becoming a lot flatter between us and Europe in terms of the energy prices and the energy mix. So therefore, it was starting to get to a point where we've built a number of interconnectors. We have to go wider and further afield in order to enact that.
Sorry, I thought the point of the interconnectors was not to make money. I thought it was to stop blackouts. Have I got that wrong?
Well, yeah, but the interconnectors are delivered as a private enterprise in effect. So again, their delivery mechanism would have to be changed to enact more. It's not part of the normal transmission network.
I'd like to just step in here as well, because I think this is very interesting, this discussion and what it highlights overall, which is, you know, and I'm going to sort of come slightly to your defense here, David, which is that you know, National Grid are a private company, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is just how it has been created, and if the market and the system is set up so that companies are running parts of it, those companies will obviously need to make money in order for that to work. It is the rules that have governed and established the market and the system that need to be changed if private companies within that system cannot give what we need. It is not the companies themselves that can fix that. They will obviously do their best within a market, but the rules are created by government, which ultimately is by people, by those in power, but also it can be, you know, influenced by us. And so that's why we have drafted the bill we have drafted. We need to reform the rules, and for all of these big problems that climate change presents us, it is largely, almost completely, it's the rules. And it's great, actually, David, to hear you say, you know, engineering wise, of course it is possible. I'm sure it will be a challenge, but you know, it's ultimately political decisions that will succeed this or not. It's not the whether an engineer can or can't build the right stuff.
We built the majority of the transmission network in the sort of 10 years after the Second World War. And it was basically built and welcomed during that period. I'm not saying that that's the right. Don't quote me on that as being something which you know is our political and public affairs approach. But if the will is there in order to do it, then the infrastructure can be built to transmit the energy.
If you go back to the Victorian era, I mean, the railways were built with private money, but an awful lot of companies went bust in the process because they picked the wrong place, or there weren't enough passengers or whatever, or the technology didn't work. Now we've got the same situation with EV charging. You know, there's all these companies out there all vying for a slice of the market, all coming up with their own solutions. I mean, surely this is, if nothing else, is an area where government ought to actually sit down and work out a sensible plan, because they want to get to zero carbon by any date. They're going to have to do something to, you know, make the market more sensible.
There may, if the other side of this question is a skills gap. If the government were to make money no object and set a target of 10 years, there probably wouldn't be enough engineers in the country to deliver it.
Okay. So we've sort of used up our time, but I would like to thank both of our speakers. I mean, I found that completely fascinating, and I think what I also found interesting was that there was so much common ground between Steve, who's lobbying to get the local electricity bill through, and David Adkins. I know David isn't actually a representative of the National Grid because a lot of what he said was in his own capacity, but it's clear that there's a lot of common ground there. And I'm sure that this is soluble. I'm sure the LEB will get passed in some form or other. John, you want to say something?
Yeah, can I just remind you, excuse me, Robin, can I just remind you to mention something about Marlow Solar Streets before you finish?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I don't know how many people from Marlow are listening in, but there is a company called IDDEA that has fitted photovoltaic panels to houses all over the UK. But what they like to do is to do it a town at a time. So they've done it in Frome, they've done it in other places, and they're doing it in Henley, and they want to do it in Marlow and places like St Albans. And the idea is that if they fit multiple installations in the same town, it makes it a lot cheaper. So instead of paying $5,500 for 12 PV panels, you end up paying $4,000. So there's an economy of scale. So they want to do this in Marlow. We've invited them to do it in Marlow, and it is being supported by Marlow Town Council, which is a relief. So anybody listening in who wants to know more about that should email John, and he'll put them in touch with IDDA.
Well, Robin, can I just say that it's definitely set for the 19th of January, 7:30, which is a Tuesday. And there's a big Zoom meeting where we hopefully expect hundreds of people to tune in.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. January the 19th, put that in your diary. And then the next Ask the Experts will hopefully be on electric vehicles. We've got a guy who's making something called Riverside, which is a small electric vehicle. It's a two-seater. It runs on a hydrogen fuel cell. And we're hoping to have him talking in February. I haven't confirmed that yet, but I hope to soon. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for the very high quality of the presentations and also the high quality of the questions that we got from the audience. So Merry Christmas to everybody. Have a COVID compliant Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. Thank you, John. Thanks, Steve. Well done.